Today we're going to make some fresh pasta. Very, very simple. 3 ingredients. Simple, but not easy. Like everything else, it takes a little practice, but we're here to show you how to do it. Flour, salt, and eggs. The general recipe for any pasta dough, if you don't have the recipe in front of you, is very, very easy. For one person, it's 100 grams of flour and 1 egg. That is the general rule. There's variations on the theme, like today, but if you don't have a recipe in front of you, that's the rule of thumb. Here I have all-purpose flour and semolina flour. So we've combined the two, and a pinch of salt. We form a little well in the center, and in that well, we drop our eggs. After you pour the eggs into the well, you start incorporating the flour slowly from the sides. You're also beating the eggs at the same time. You can beat them pre or post. And as you can see, the mixture is getting thicker and thicker. Eventually, your fork will have to be replaced by your hands because it's going to get very sticky, and that's what we want. At this point, I'm going to start using my hands. As you can see, the mixture is getting very, very sticky. So we'll finish incorporating the flour and the egg. So generally, when you're kneading this pasta, I'm going to move this to the board now. They say, when I was doing cooking school, that once you start kneading the pasta, you should be kneading it for about 20 minutes, which is great, but sometimes you don't have that kind of time. So I just like to knead it until I feel like all of the flour has been absorbed, or all of the egg has been absorbed into the flour. Now you might notice that when I'm kneading this pasta, I'm constantly turning it 90 degrees. Fold it onto itself and back out. We're not crushing it, we're not squeezing it, we're just pushing it out. In other words, incorporating everything back into the center, turning it 90 degrees, and continuing that for as long as the pasta needs it. The pasta dough will tell you when it's done. It'll get increasingly hard to knead the dough. So, after much kneading, we get something like this. Now, the key to this is rest. The dough needs to rest after kneading. It helps the gluten to form, it helps the gluten to relax as well. If we were to try to flatten this out or start making our pasta immediately, it would just spring right back. It wouldn't let you do it because it's very, very rigid right now after all that work. The key is to let it rest for at least 1 hour, if not overnight. So we've let the dough rest for about an hour or so, and so you'll notice that it's nice and spongy, not too dry. And now what we're going to do is we're going to turn this into fettuccine. We have here our food processor, which turns into a pasta maker with the proper attachments. When I was a kid, we used to do this by hand in those little handheld crank machines, and my job was to flatten the dough, and then my mom would turn it into fettuccine. And also my job was to crank the crank. Today we have technology which allows us to do it a lot quicker, but if you can get your hands on one of those old-fashioned pasta machines that attaches to the table, I recommend that you get one. Specifically if you have kids in the house, hours of fun, and you're teaching them an incredible life tool. So here we go. Before we can turn this into our desired pasta shape, which today is fettuccine, we have to flatten out the pasta. Essentially, we're making lasagna sheets. Really, it's what they use to make lasagna. There are different settings that we can use for lasagna as far as thinness goes. Today, we're going to go to, because we're making fettuccine, we're going to go to number 6. Now, they're all a little different. This particular one starts at the number 1 and goes up to the number 8. The number 1 being the thickest, and number 8 being the thinnest. Some of them go the opposite way. It's just a matter of getting to know your machine. But we're going to start this guy at number 1, which is the thickest. So I've got this piece. I'm going to turn it on. And we're going to put this guy through. Here we go. And every time you put it up one setting, in other words, we're just thinning this out. At this point, after number 3, you can fold the pasta back onto itself. Essentially, the width of your attachment. You flour it a bit. It's important not to flour it previous to this step, because if you do fold it onto itself, what you don't want is layers of flour. And then what I'll do is I'll put it back through, beginning at number 1 again, but the other way. It'll come on nice and smooth. And here we go to number 2, and I'm going to go one at a time to number 6, which is my desired thickness for fettuccine. I find that number 6 gives it a nice al dente flavor. It's not too thin, but it's also not overly thick where you feel like it's gummy. And here we go. I'm going to cut this one in half because I don't want my fettuccine to be too long, and try to recreate some sort of Lady and the Tramp scene, and I will flour it. At this point in the process, flour is your best friend. Keeps it from sticking to itself when we divide it up into little fettuccine strands. The worst is putting it through and then have the fettuccine strands stick to each other, and you have to all pull them out by hand. It becomes a little tedious, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. I will change this attachment to the fettuccine attachment here. We'll turn this back on, and like magic, fettuccine. Throw in a little nest. Put the next one through. Simple as that. So our fettuccine is made, and now we're going to pair it with a beautiful cream sauce called Norcina sauce. Norcina sauce is from an Umbrian village called Norcia. And Norcia is well known around Italy and parts of Europe for its pork products. It is a small hillside town that makes some of the best sausages in the world. Norcina simply means someone from Norcia. So of course, one of the main ingredients, if not the main ingredient of our sauce today, is going to be mild Italian sausage. It could be hot Italian sausage, it could be Tuscan sausage, whatever you like. It can be andouille, it can be anything you like, as long as it's not too spicy for you. I like mild Italian sausage because it doesn't overtake the dish. Now, I have taken the liberty of decasing, in other words, removing the sausage from its case. I've got one over here that I'll show you. It's very, very simple. Cut it through and remove its casing. And you dispose of that. You have a hot pan here. I use olive oil. You can use canola if you like. You can use grapeseed oil. I love olive oil. I have to love olive oil because I'm Italian. If I don't, they don't let me back into the country. And we immediately start sizzling the sausage. We're trying to essentially brown the sausage. I'm going to break it up in a moment. Got the rest of our ingredients here. The recipe calls for shallots. If you don't have shallots, feel free to use onions, white onions, red onions. So we're gonna break up the sausage as much as we can, because I'd like this to be crumbly. I don't want large pieces of sausage per se. I want it to be as crumbly as possible. And in this hot pan, it really won't take long to cook through. Like my dad always used to say, let the fire do its job. In other words, leave it, let it cook. By mixing it around with a spoon or shaking the pan, you're really impeding the contact of the meat to the pan. We're going to add the onion, shallot, whatever it is that you're using. In the meantime, I'm going to chop up the garlic, and I'll add that as well. Now, a recipe may call for minced garlic, chopped garlic, shaved garlic. I just like to cut mine nice and thin. It gives the plate an added texture. The flavor will always be there, but it just looks nicer in the plate for me, in the sauce. And at this point, I'm also going to add the mushrooms. Now, if you have access to wild mushrooms, great. Porcini, chanterelles, anything like that. Whether they're fresh or even dry. They add such a depth of flavor, an earthy flavor to the sauce. We're using regular cremini, regular white mushrooms, and those are great too. All right, at this point, as this is cooking through, this is the time where we deglaze our pan. It picks up all of the lovely bits that have been left behind at the bottom of the pan, as well as adding some flavor. And you just let it go until the alcohol evaporates. Now that the alcohol is evaporated, I will add the cream. This is heavy cream, 30% or higher. In this case, I believe it's 33%. And once this cream is in, you essentially let the sauce simmer for about 5 or 6 minutes. The cream will reduce slightly. You don't want it to come to a boil per se, but if you can get it to a nice little simmer, it will extract all the flavor from the sausage and the mushrooms, and we're gonna have an amazing, amazing sauce that takes minutes to make. Simple and delicious. So now that our Norcina sauce is simmering nicely, we're gonna grab the fettuccine we just made, and we're gonna pop them in some boiling water that's been pre-salted. How much salt? A very common question. How much salt do I put in the water? You essentially want it to taste like the Mediterranean Ocean. So let's go over to the, let's go do this. So here's our pasta that we've nested. We're gonna drop it into some boiling water, and then we're just gonna let it cook 3 to 4 minutes at the most, maybe even 2 minutes. It doesn't take very long. Fresh pasta is almost instantaneous. Our pasta is ready. Been about 3 minutes or so. I'm gonna drain this. Pasta water, by the way, is your best friend. Don't throw it out. It helps thicken the sauce, any sauce. It helps make the sauce creamier. You'll see once we throw this in, how the pasta sauce blends beautifully with the pasta, but also the pasta water, creating this even creamier texture. So I've already put some pepper in the sauce, and then I'm gonna plate it, and I'm gonna put more pepper on top, and some Parmesan cheese. Okay, now we're ready to plate. As mentioned before, copious amounts of pepper, and top it off with some greens. And there you have it. Pasta alla Norcina.
Cherry red holds, she runs like a dream. A 1962 Cutlass Supreme hit the #1 hole as we roll along west. Just open up your mind under a cigarette sky.